but you've been disappointed so many times that you just don't want to hope anymore because hoping feels dangerous. And I know that woman all too well because I was that woman at one point. Hey ladies, welcome to The Woman Behind the Wallet with Prea, the podcast for ambitious women ready to stop managing money and start building wealth from the inside out. I'm your host, Prea. Now, you worked hard for everything you have, and yet there's this quiet feeling that you're capable of so much more. You're right, and this show is for you. You ready? Let's go. So let me go ahead and get this disclaimer out the way. Episode 1 is going to start out heavy. Now, before we get into money, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the woman behind the show. Because in order for you to understand why I do the work that I do, you must understand where I come from. And where I come from is a story that most people would choose not to tell out loud. But here I am speaking my truth. So here goes. 1 month after my 10th birthday, my father made a decision to commit murder-suicide. So he killed my stepmother, then he killed himself. And my biological mom passed when I was 3 years old. So in the blink of an eye, I became an orphan. Now, that particular night, I was sleeping 2 doors down at my stepsister's grandmother's house. And my second oldest brother was home at the time, along with my little sister. So my brother is the one that heard the arguing. He heard the screaming. He heard the gunshot. As he decided to start coming down the steps, my father ordered him back upstairs. When he got back upstairs, he heard another gunshot. And so my brother was the one that found them, and he was the one that called the police. Now, I don't remember much about that evening or the aftermath. I think I kind of blocked it out because it was so traumatic. But I remember being awakened from my sleep. I remember crying. I remember speaking to the police, but I couldn't necessarily process everything that was happening. At 10 years old, I just don't think our brains are fully developed to handle that type of trauma. I do remember wondering, though, what is going to happen to me? And I also remember wondering if my father didn't want to stay, then who would want me? And that particular question followed me well into adulthood. It followed me into my relationships. It followed me into my financial decisions. And it followed me in every moment where I had to choose between asking for help and figuring it out alone. Because when something like that happens to you, you put on this armor and you don't want to ask for help. You just want to do everything yourself because you don't want to rely on anyone. So thankfully, my oldest brother became my guardian at the time. He stepped up when he did not have to. And I'm eternally grateful for that because if he didn't become our guardians, then we would have become wards of the state and we would have ended up in foster care. But the person that truly raised me was my great aunt. I call her grandma because everyone around me call her grandma. That's how many grandchildren she had. And she was on my father's side and she loved me without condition. And I'll try to not talk about her and cry. And she loved me without hesitation. And get this, y'all, she took me in at the age of 15 when she was in her 80s. Now, can you imagine being 80 something, 80 plus, and opening your home up to a teenager? That is bananas because the teens that we're raising now are a different breed, okay? So for her to be 80, for her to open up her home to me, it just speaks to the type of woman that she was. A lot of people said to her that I don't know. She may wild out. She's just waiting for a chance to wild out. So you're going to have to watch her. But I've always been a quiet kid and I've always been a shy kid and I've always been a kid about my business. So none of that came to pass. And when I had my first daughter, I was in her house. When I had my second daughter, I was still in her house. When I didn't have money for diapers, she helped. When I didn't have enough for groceries, she helped. She never made me feel like a burden, which meant everything to a girl who has spent years trying not to be one. She was the first example of someone choosing me fully without conditions. So when I think about her, I just think of all the love that she gave me. And she didn't necessarily have a lot by the world's standards. But what she gave me was the security, the sense of stability, the sense that I was worth showing up for. And that foundation, you can't put a number on that. So growing up the way that I did though, it taught me a lot about survival. I learned to be in the shadows. I learned to stay quiet, how to take up as little space as possible. What's the saying? Be seen and not be heard. That was me. Don't need too much. Don't ask for too much. Just stay in your place. For a long time, that version did exactly what it needed to do to get me through. And I played small because small was safe. And it was safe when I was 10. But playing small when you're an adult is costly. And when you grow up in survival mode, your brain learns to protect you from pain, right? And we don't plan for the future because we're so focused on today. We're so focused on the present. We're so focused on the next 30 minutes. So a lot of us are making financial decisions from that place of survival, from that scared place that we were in as children. And I know for me, I understand because I did it too. So in the households that I grew up in, money was never discussed. We knew it existed. We knew it was necessary. And if you were unlucky, you knew when it wasn't enough, right? But no one sat me down to explain how it worked. So I adopted the spin now, figure it out later. And for the most part, it all worked itself out. And I'm a firm believer that everything always works itself out. But that type of mindset of spend now and figure it out later costs me in more ways than I can count. So that's where we're going to go next with this story. I got married at 20 and I was pregnant with my first child. And to get married at that age, I felt like I was doing the right thing, the responsible thing. And it was also something that was required of us if we wanted to move back to my grandmother's house. I had an old school grandmom, y'all. She wore the skirts, everything, didn't wear no pants. And to go back to her house, we needed to be married. But in a lot of ways, I was also trying to build the stability I never had. The family, the house, just something solid. But I wouldn't necessarily use the word solid for what we were building or what we built. We bought a house early on in the marriage. By all intents and purposes, buying a house at 22, 23, that is amazing. But it was one of those things where we weren't ready for that responsibility financially. And as soon as we closed, like literally as soon as we closed and that first mortgage payment was due, I realized really quickly that I needed to take my butt out there and go find a job because we couldn't make the mortgage payments. We ended up modifying that loan and we stretched it out to a 40-year mortgage because we just could not keep up with the payments. I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, but I did find out years later when I went to go sell the house and walked away with almost no equity because I was making payments for 12, 13 years and practically nothing to show for it because it was all interest. In my marriage, though, I was the one managing the bills, all of them. Everything that kept the family life running passed through my hands. I bear that responsibility. And it caused resentment. Now, he did go to work. He did bring home his paycheck, but he wasn't the one worrying about bills. Initially, I thought it was okay, told myself it was okay. But when you carry everything alone, it changes you. And it's a slow burn. Like it didn't change me all at once or overnight, but when you're worrying about which bill you're going to pay and it's keeping you up at night and they sleeping next to you like a baby, it just causes so much resentment. I became angry. I became really short, impatient, and I started to slowly lose respect for him. I stopped seeing him as a partner and I started seeing him as another responsibility. And when that shift happens, it just eats away at your marriage. So the financial stress didn't just hurt our bank account, it just, dismantled whatever we were trying to build. When I had my third child, that's when things became really, really tough. Checks were bouncing, our bank accounts got garnished. I hid my car so it wouldn't get repossessed. I was in full blown survival mode. Like, let me just make it through this day. And when you're in it, you're not making great decisions. You're just making the next decision, whatever is going to hold it together a little while longer. We were overdrawing our accounts regularly. And honestly, it helped us. Although every overdraft came with that $35 fee, overdrawing our accounts was the reason why the mortgage stayed current. It was the reason why the car insurance was always paid and never lapsed. I was basically using the system to avoid everything falling apart. It was not ideal, but it was resourceful. I give you that. When the marriage ended, we were so broke. We couldn't even afford to get a divorce. It took years of paying an attorney to finalize that divorce. I ended up walking away with the house and the car. I had my girls, and my credit was taking hit after hit because we were so far behind on our bills. And it just reminded me of what I experienced as a child. It put me in that place of being small, little 10 again. I was just surviving all over again. Finances were a hot mess after the separation and divorce. So I do want to talk about bankruptcy because a lot of times we associate bankruptcy with you weren't careful, you weren't responsible, and there's a lot of shame attached to it. But I want to talk about it honestly because I lived it, and that shame and that fear of what people think keeps a lot of us stuck. But at the time, I was a single mother of three little girls, and I was doing the best that I could and letting go of what I couldn't pay. And that worked for a while, but then Drexel sent me a letter. They came for me. I had unpaid tuition. It wasn't a lot of money that they were trying to get back, but at the same time, they sent me a summons. So they were suing me for that unpaid tuition. And I knew once I received that letter, I had no other choice but to file for bankruptcy. I've already been through a bank garnishment and I was not going through that again. So it was time. I called an attorney. To be honest, sitting across from him with the weight of that lawsuit on my shoulders, it was very humbling. It was like, I'm a failure. I'm going through this again. Why me, Lord? Haven't I been through enough? Lord knows I've been through a lot. And everything that I was trying to hold together was just slowly crumbling. But the attorney started to go through the steps and explain exactly what bankruptcy was, chapter 7 versus chapter 13. I chose chapter 13 because I didn't want to walk away from my house. The girls and I, we needed a place to stay. So I needed to keep my home. So when you're in chapter 13, you're just reorganizing your debts, right? It's a structured repayment plan. So you work with the court, you pay what you can over a period of time. And when I say can, they go through your expenses and they figure out the amount that you have to pay into the court system. And at the end of it, you come out on the other side, and whatever you couldn't pay off, all those debts are wiped away with the exception of student loans. Student loans are the devil. I can't stand student loans. But that's another topic for another day. So I look at bankruptcy as a tool, and it's a legal tool that exists to help people that are in the same kind of situation that I was in. When I realized that, the shame it went away. I started looking at it differently. Now, I will say that bankruptcy was on my mind for some time. So this was not the first inkling that I should file for bankruptcy. I feel like God was nudging me towards it for a while, giving me like little hints, little single signals. It will pop up here and there. Maybe you should file. And I wasn't ready. I was like, no, I don't need to file. It's not going to help me with my student loans, which was my biggest debt at the time. And I was too proud. I can turn this around. That's what I was thinking. So I kept carrying it until it was impossible to ignore. And the summons made me realize that. That summons I received from Drexel was not an accident, and it ended up being a blessing in disguise. But after I filed for bankruptcy, I could finally breathe again. When you are in survival mode for as long as I was in, the fact that you have some breathing room is huge. That is not a small thing. It becomes everything. I began contributing to my 401k. I actually had some spending money, and I can just breathe, right? I initially resisted filing because student loans were my biggest debt, and bankruptcy does not discharge federal or private student loans. But some of my private student loans had gone unpaid for so long that the statute of limitations expired. And that basically meant that the creditors could not legally collect from me anymore. Now, there are ways that they can get around that, but you would have to play into their hands in order to restart that clock. So I knew that much. So after coming out of Chapter 13 bankruptcy, those private loans, they fell off my credit report entirely. All the years of late payments and negative reporting was gone, and my credit score went up. It was that long. That's how long I was in a financial shit show, to the point where 3 years in bankruptcy and my private student loans were falling off my credit report. I was a mess for over 7+ years. Now, bankruptcy was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make. But again, it was one of the best because I stopped drowning. So I want to reiterate that bankruptcy is a tool. Now, not everyone needs to file it. Some things can be worked through, but it is a tool. It's not a verdict. And sometimes the most financially responsible thing to do is to actually use it. Bankruptcy was my rock bottom, but it was also a moment where I stopped lying to myself. Up until that point, I had a story about what I wasn't taught about what happened to me, the circumstances that led me to this place. Now, my story is my story, right? And my story is not untrue, but I was using it as a place to live. So bankruptcy forced me to own my part in the mess that I created, and I had to learn. So that's exactly what I did. And the part of the Drexel story that I haven't told you yet and why it became a blessing is because when I filed for bankruptcy, that hold that Drexel had on my account was removed. So remember, I had unpaid tuition and I had a hold on my account, so I could no longer register for classes. But filing for bankruptcy removed that hold. That hold kept me from registering for my last class. I had one class left, y'all, and then I would have gotten my degree. As soon as that hold was lifted, I registered for that class. So that lawsuit pushed me to file. And although it felt like another body blow, because I was taking hit after hit after hit, it ended up being the thing that cleared my path to graduating from Drexel University. And the other good thing about that is that my girls were there to witness me walking across the stage. They saw their mother getting her college degree. Now, Drexel tried to take me down. And if I did not move towards bankruptcy, they would have. But instead, they handed me my degree. And in 2017, I bought my forever home. So I want you to think about where I started and where I am in 2017. There's a lot of distance between those 2 points. I hid my car so it wouldn't get repossessed. And now I'm at the point where I'm buying my dream home, a home that had 4 bedrooms, so each of my girls could have their own room. That happened because I decided to do better. So when you begin rebuilding financially, you shouldn't necessarily do it alone. I didn't do it alone. And that's something that we don't talk about enough. I went to therapy. I spent my entire life carrying the weight of my father's choices as if it was a reflection of my worth. I internalized that traumatic incident at the age of 10. I was a little girl who wondered who will want her. And I grew into a woman that wondered the same thing in adulthood. So every failed relationship, every disappointment, every moment someone chose to walk away, I took that personally. I internalized it all. And I made it mean something about me. The therapy helped me understand that my father's choices were his choices. It had nothing to do with me. And that the people that walked away were making their own decisions for their own reasons. And so that became my foundation. You cannot build lasting wealth from a place of unworthiness. Let me say that again. You cannot build lasting wealth from a place of unworthiness. You can make the money, you can follow a spending plan, a budget, you can check all the boxes, but if somewhere underneath it all, you believe you don't deserve more, you don't deserve to thrive, you will find a way to sabotage it every single time. So the inner work that has to be done is not separate from the financial work. It becomes the financial work. So I do want to share really quickly a moment that changed everything for me. It was around 2016. I'm in my home in Southwest Philly. I have a middle class salary. Every evening when I would leave work, I would get in my car. I would call my friend. I would complain. I would complain about my boss. I would complain about work. I would complain about the neighborhood. I would complain about wanting something different, about how things needed to change, the bills, all these things. And then one day it hit me. Prea, nothing's going to change if you stay ungrateful. And it's a saying that says, if you complain, things remain the same. And I believe that to be true. So I changed my words. And every drive home, as soon as I would hit my block, I started saying, thank you, God, for allowing me to own my home and giving my girls and I a place to stay. Because in reality, thank God I had that mortgage that I modified, right? My mortgage payments at that time, I could easily afford. If we had to rent somewhere, it would have been hundreds of dollars more. So I had to start being grateful. I also wrote down some goals. When I wrote those goals down, I knew it was going to be done. I just didn't know when. One of the goals was buying another home in a nice neighborhood, a quiet neighborhood. A year later, that goal was realized. And I want people to understand that your mindset can become a financial instrument. The way you think about money, the way you talk about money, the gratitude you bring to your circumstances, it shapes what you build. And I adopted this mantra. I operate from a place of abundance. I don't operate from a place of lack, but abundance. In 2025, I had a conversation with a close friend that changed everything for me. She said, Prea, you're so good with numbers. You know how to navigate your finances. Look at what you built after the divorce, after the bankruptcy. You really should consider helping other women because we're out here lost. And it hit home. Sometimes you need someone else to name your gift because it's something that comes so easily to you, you fail to recognize it as a gift. So once she planted that seed, it was go time. I have over 15 years of accounting and asset management experience. I applied everything I lived through and built Reframe Financial Coaching from the ground up. And I didn't build it because I had a perfect financial journey. I built it because I had a real one. So I do want to talk to someone directly. You may be tired, but it's not the tired that sleep fixes. It's the type of tired that lives inside of you. The kind of tired that comes from being the person everyone leans on. You may be the first in your family to make it, the one they call when things fall apart. You're the one that figures it out for everybody else. And sometimes you wonder, who's figuring it out for me? You know you want to do better, but you've been disappointed so many times that you just don't want to hope anymore because hoping feels dangerous. And I know that woman all too well because I was that woman at one point. And I want you to understand the fact that you are still here, you're still listening, you're still trying. That is not small. That is the beginning of something great. But beginning something alone is really, really hard. And you've been doing hard things alone for a very long time. So that's why I built Reframe Financial Coaching. I actually sit with you. I understand your specific story and I help you build something that actually lasts from the inside out. So if today's episode stirs something inside of you, if something felt like it was written for you, I want you to take a step. Book a breakthrough session. We'll talk about where you are, where you want to be, and whether coaching is the right next step. There's no pressure, No obligation, just an honest conversation about what's actually possible. The link is in the show notes. You've been carrying this long enough. It's time to build. That's a wrap. Thanks for checking into The Woman Behind the Wallet with Prea Epps. If this message hit home, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And while you're at it, leave a review. It'll help more women find the show. And remember, when she changes, everything changes. The woman behind the wallet is waiting. Go meet her. I'm Prea Epps, and I'll see you next episode.